Philip, thank you very much. I'm going to pick up on a notion that Andrew just put on the table to introduce you or to welcome you. Cheryl, gentlemen. There is, looking from afar, from the distance, it looked that there might be others, but it is gentlemen only. Philip, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. I have been asked to do two things. I've been asked to give you an update on the European Union's developments with a view to the cable market, and I've been asked to link this to the GCC region. A few years back, this task would have been easy. You will recall the Desertec initiative, the bold vision that has been created a few years back, which I'm not quite sure what the right words are, has vanished a little bit due to, I think, a variety of challenges that have been put to this project, both politically and economically. So, for me, quite frankly, to manage your expectations, it's going to be a challenge for me to deliver on both objectives. Linking it to the Middle East will be a challenge for me because I think the direct connect today is not as evident anymore. But I felt, listening to the last presentations, I hope that my presentation will be a third piece in the puzzle after Philip outlined a global perspective and ways to break eggs, and Andrew gave us a good, an excellent perspective here of the region with a focus on Africa. I'm going to focus on Europe, and I do believe we are neighbors. Europe and GCC, we are neighboring regions, and I think it is important and good for us to talk, to exchange, and to be aware of what is happening in our neighboring homes. Philip already introduced us. Europacable, we represent the full scope of wire and cable manufacturers in Europe, and our mission is to represent the industry towards the European institutions and raise the visibility of the wire and cable manufacturers in Brussels and across Europe. Our members really encompass the whole range of telecom and energy cables, and it has already been mentioned that, of course, a big step for us on the energy side was the recent merger with NKT and ABB, which the Commission gave a green light to just last week, effective 1st of March, for us as Europacable. This is really good news because on the energy side and the extra high voltage business, we can say we represent the full industry scope. We also, and maybe here's a link to the region, are very happy to have Borealis Borouge as an associated industry partner. Look, the basic line or message or underlying thought of my presentation here today, and I was happy to hear that it echoed through the morning, is that policy and regulatory frameworks actually can stimulate cable demand. You could even go further, and you could see that the question here on the table again that Andrew put forward is, where's growth going to come from? What new biz strategies is the industry going to pursue? And our take from a Brussels perspective is that one of the best new biz strategies that this industry can actually embark on is to be active in public affairs and to try and shape the policy framework in which you operate. Because I'm going to give you, as we see in Europe, 3 examples where the policy framework has directly translated into creating legislation that, to cut straight through, will help your industry sell more cables. Point 1. Point 2, let me also please be very clear. We did not create the waves. There is societal and political frameworks that have created and generated the overall conditions in which we operate. But at least for the European perspective and for Brussels, we're very happy that we hope and we believe that we have created the tools to go surfing. Let me talk about 3 dimensions: energy, telecoms, and construction, in which we've seen the policy framework lead to cable demand. What I'm always going to try to do is to sketch out the overarching umbrella framework which Brussels and EU member states have been looking at, the overall objectives that they have set, and then to relay and translate this down into the concrete demand for wire and cable products. So first, when we look at the energy side, last year Brussels put forward what they have in the jargon called the objective to create the energy union, i.e. really to bring together in these 5 dimensions that you see listed the continent, the 27 member states, to create a single energy market. As discussions moved ahead and it really emerged from the renewables targets, people began to realize, well, hang on, okay, we can set renewable targets with X%, but actually we are not going to get there unless we physically interconnect the member states. Because in Europe, and I'm not aware of how the situation would be mirrored here in your region of the world, if you look at today's electricity grids in Europe, they actually still reflect and mirror national borders. There is very few interconnections which actually create the single energy market that will be needed to meet those 5 objectives and ideas that have been identified. So then in 2015, member states went away, and this is now where our industry comes in and where our work comes in Brussels, to define specific what they have called interconnection targets. So it has been agreed that by 2020, every single member state needs to be able to transmit 10% of their installed capacity to their direct neighboring country, and this is to move up to 15% by 2030. So with that, directly, the Commission and member states have put up a very concrete target to build more grids, which are to be realized by what, again, in the jargon is called projects of common interest. PCIs, a project of common interest, is defined as a project which will at least include 2 member states, so it's got to be crossing borders to be eligible for specific funding that will be made available from the European community to get those lines built. And we come to a total of some 90,000 kilometers of high and extra high voltage cables underground and submarine, which will be needed in Europe for the coming 10 years. The focus on this slide really for me is on the submarine aspect, but this is then mirrored on, and those numbers are, we think, probably on the land side still too low, because, and again, I'm not aware to what extent this is a problem. What we see in Europe is that the greatest barrier and the greatest factor to delay these projects to be brought and to be delivered is actually the lack of public acceptance towards overhead transmission pylons. You see more and more communities across Europe not only popping up, but actually interconnecting themselves through social media to fight against projects in their regions, in their constituencies. And we see that regulators and policymakers more and more embrace what we as Europacable have called the concept of partial undergrounding, i.e. that in principle the line will be built as an overhead line, but in sensitive areas we will insert underground sections to actually get public consent quicker. The first country that has really made a leap change in this to reflect this approach in the legislative framework is Germany, who in December 2015 adopted a new legislation which covers 2 aspects. They have identified, and we're still working on that to widen that, 16 what they call pilot projects where partial undergrounding of 380 kV AC lines is obligatory. And then, and here I have to admit they took us by surprise, they went all the way for new HVDC projects. Any new HVDC project in Germany will need to give priority to undergrounding. The biggest case that we will see is this, I'm sure you've all heard about it, it's the so-called Südlink project, which is the biggest HVDC land project, I think actually, well, not globally probably, but in Europe. where the idea is to link the offshore wind generation farms in the North Sea to the demand centers in southern Europe, in southern Germany. The project is to come online for 2015. Tenet is the TSO in the driving seat here. And what is very helpful and very interesting for us is that for the first time, really, the costs have been quantified of what is the cost to society of delays, of not having the projects. Because when we go out and promote undergrounding as a solution to overcome public acceptance, the key argument that we've been getting back for the past 10 years is, yes, but your cables are too expensive and it costs too much if you put them into the ground. The extra charge to the electricity bill to the end consumer will be too high. We've always said that the biggest cost to society actually lies in the cost of not having the line. And the cost of not having this line has been quantified here with a substantial figure. Moving on to the telecom sector, and actually, Gerd, remember this all started with you when you were running the Europacable telecom team. I was initially tempted to do a survey ad hoc here in the room. This is the latest figures that the Commission has put out on the connectivity level of Europe. We've got 65% of Europeans who today buy products and services online, 75% do their banking, 68% read and watch the news. Then it drops, which I think is a strong level already. Then it really drops down in terms of company users of cloud computing or selling via SMEs. And so the Commission, first of all, really welcomes this development and has then looked, okay, what is the connectivity level that we have in Europe today? And again, I'm not aware of what the comparative figures would look like for you in your region here. 2015, 71% of our EU households had access to a fast internet connection, which is a good number, I think. But the big challenge to the Commission, and they've clearly put it out like that, is the divide in between urban and rural areas. And this is where the Commission is really putting the key focus. I don't know, having 5G in Berlin, in Paris, or in London will be probably a very easy ride, but to also put it out into the countryside, that's the biggest challenge that the Commission has put up with. And then moving down again here on the 4G, you again see the split between rural and urban areas. And this is where the European Commission has identified their key need for a policy framework to be inserted to address this issue. They've also then projected the bandwidth needs moving forward. Today, we see us sending text messages, calling, sending emails or WhatsApp messages, which is probably fine with the existing networks that we have. But as we move into the future with a person-to-machine and then ultimately with a machine-to-machine communication, which the bandwidth needs to be provided for, the current networks clearly will not meet the demands. Which is why the European Commission just in September last year came up with 3 overarching objectives. The first one, the gigabit connectivity for all main socioeconomic drivers, really being their absolute #1, because here, by connecting what they call socioeconomic drivers, i.e. schools, universities, hospitals, public places, they really want to create a leverage that people experience the benefits of high connectivity, high-speed connectivity, and then claim it for other areas. Second point is 5G connectivity for all urban areas and major terrestrial transport paths. This is on cities and this is on motorways, i.e. connected driving, where the Commission is setting the clear focus. And then the 100 megabits connectivities, which probably, again, within urban areas is not a challenge, but the challenge lies in really ensuring that this speed will also be guaranteed in local areas, or in rural areas. So with that, the Commission presented its proposal for what they call the Gigabit Society in the autumn of last year, which sees 3 very concrete legislative proposals. They're working on the communications codes, an action plan to roll out 5G, and the last one we understand is really a personal, or has been a personal idea of Commissioner Oettinger in the current difficulties and crisis of perceptions of how Brussels and the European institutions are perceived. Commissioner Oettinger had the wish to come up with something very concrete that citizens can feel, where Europe actually does something for them. Personally, I think it's deplorable that the falling away of roaming charges is actually not really perceived as something that Europe gives European citizens. So what they want to do is a new initiative on Wi-Fi for Europe, where they will have free Wi-Fi access points across Europe that people can just connect to. How does that relate back to you selling more cables? It is not yet as precise and as clear and as quantifiable as it is on the energy sector, where we can really measure the kilometers down. But actually, in terms of from a political perspective, this is a revolutionary step that the Commission has taken, because one of the founding principles of the European Commission is that they will set a policy framework without specifying which technologies are needed to meet these objectives. In the jargon, it is technology neutral. And this cuts across all policy areas. The Commission will always stay technology neutral. They broke with that rule on this one, because in this Gigabit Society paper that they came up with, they said to build all this and to meet these objectives, Europe, 1, will need first-class communication networks, and then they went all the way to say that future-proof fiber to all buildings will be the key tool. This is unseen in Commission jargon, that they single out a specific technology of how they reach their objectives. Investment costs have been quantified. It has also been identified that there's a significant investment gap of 155 billion projected for these years to come. The Commission has made, under what is called the Connecting Europe facility, money is being made available to build infrastructure projects in Europe. Unfortunately, the telecoms budget got slashed for the benefit of electricity and gas fundings. We hope that this will change, but also here I think the Commission is confident that private investment will help to ease and bridge that gap. Moving on quickly to the last dimension, which is construction site. Philip already mentioned it, the Construction Products Directive, or regulation as it is called now at the end of it. I'm always a bit hesitant to put this forward, because this is an example which took 20 years in the making, and I think many will use this as an example of how long it takes to get a policy framework through the Brussels machine. I hope that you have seen from the 2 previous examples that on the energy and telecom side, really the Brussels machine is moving super fast track, and all the specifics that we have seen on the previous examples took 2 to 3 years to become a reality. Here, I think you're familiar with the overall framework. As of the 1st of July this year, we have harmonized standards in place across EU member states, looking at the reaction, not the resistance, the reaction to fire of cable installations in buildings. And there has been a clear recognition from the side of the European communities that low fire hazard cables considerably increase the level of fire safety in buildings, and therefore serve to better protect citizens in houses. The requirements for all the value chain are, in theory, clearly set. The devil will now be in the detail of actually seeing it through, recognizing that every single member state will have their own interpretations and their own levels that they will set for the Euro classes, i.e. the fire safety classes, which will be tested against large-scale tests to be put in. They are mandatory, however. The CE marking will be mandatory, as well as the declaration of performance. as a legal prerequisite to put the cable on the market, and later on as a proof point to be checked in case of failure or troubles. What have we done as Europacable? Two aspects, and again, it resonated in earlier speeches. As Europacable, the members have put a clear emphasis on the need for quality. Again, I think it was Gerd who mentioned it, sorry. The infrastructure investments, the cables that will be put into the ground will be there, one, for 30, 40 years, two, many of them will be paid for by public money. So we better get them right. Which is why, as Europacable, our members, all of them, have now co-signed what we call the Europacable Industry Charter, where members commit to high-quality cables, both as the finished product, but also during the production process. And this is in place. We are seeking to raise visibility and raise the awareness of this commitment, and is directly, of course, linked to CPR, to fire safety, where we have now just recently put up an FAQ on the really complex dimension of CPR requirements for cables. So with that, and 2 minutes to go, I think if you boil it down, it's very simple. Our future will be ever more electrified and digitalized. High quality cables will be key to ride that wave. What we have seen in Europe is that there's a policy framework in place which will shape or has already created a higher demand for high quality cables, both on the energy side, the telecom side, and the construction side. The question, and happy maybe for discussions afterwards, is how could ideas maybe of the framework that have been put in place in Brussels serve as ideas, as examples for the GCC, recognizing, of course, that you've got a very different market situation here. And then ultimately, as neighbors that we are, how could we come back to reconnect our two regions in a global perspective? Thank you very much.